February 1st, 1943. High above the scorched earth of the Tunisian desert, the laws of aerodynamics have effectively ceased to apply. The air temperature is 40 degrees below zero, but inside the fuselage of the B-17F Flying Fortress, known as the All-American, the wind chill is lethal. A gale-force slipstream roars through a jagged, gaping hole where the rear fuselage used to be. Moments ago, this aircraft was a precision weapon of war. Now it is a flying wreck, held together by little more than a single longitudinal spar and a few strips of twisted aluminum. A German Messerschmitt fighter has just collided with the bomber, disintegrating entirely as it sliced through the metal skin, leaving the tail section swaying sickeningly in the wind, almost completely severed from the main cabin. The gunners in the waist watch in horror as the empennage twists independently of the wings, threatening to snap off with every vibration of the engines. Yet, against all logic, the propellers are still turning, and the broken spine of the All-American holds. By the opening weeks of 1943, the war in North Africa has devolved into a brutal, grinding race for logistics. The sweeping maneuvers of the previous year have hardened into a bottleneck. On the eastern side, the British 8th Army is pushing relentlessly from Libya. On the west, American and British forces from Operation Torch are squeezing the Axis pocket in Tunisia. The German Wehrmacht, cornered with their backs to the Mediterranean Sea, is not capitulating. Instead, they are fortifying. Adolf Hitler has poured reinforcements into the Tunisian bridgehead, turning the airspace over North Africa into one of the most lethal corridors on Earth. For the bomber crews of the United States Army Air Forces, this is a different war than the grey, cloud-choked campaigns over Europe. Here, the sun is blinding. The horizons are infinite, and there is nowhere to hide. The 97th Bombardment Group, the unit to which the All-American belongs, operates out of a forward airfield in Biskra, Algeria. They call it the Garden of Allah. The name suggests a paradise, but the reality is a primitive dust-choked strip of hard-packed earth surrounded by an unforgiving desert. The ground crews fight a constant, losing war against the sand, which works its way into piston rings, gun breeches, and hydraulic lines. Tents flap incessantly in the wind, and the heat of the day gives way to bone-chilling cold at night. This is the 12th Air Force, our tactical air force tasked with a strategic mission, strangling the Axis supply lines. The primary targets are the seaports of Tunis and Bizerte. Through these harbors flow the ammunition, fuel, and panzers that General Erwin Rommel needs to keep the Afrika Korps fighting. If the bombers can smash the docks and sink the transports, the German army in Africa will wither and die. If they fail, the stalemate could drag on for bloody months, delaying the invasion of Europe. But the Germans know exactly where the blow is coming from. The Luftwaffe has concentrated some of its most experienced fighter wings in this shrinking pocket. Aces from the Russian front and the Channel coast are flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s out of concrete paved airfields near Tunis. They have the advantage of short supply lines and advanced radar warning systems. They know when the Americans are coming, and they have developed tactics specifically designed to dismantle the heavy bomber combat boxes used by the B-17S. The B-17 Flying Fortress is designed to be a self-defending weapon, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns. In theory, a tight formation of fortresses creates an impenetrable wall of lead. In practice, the sky over Tunisia is a geometry of death. The German pilots have learned that attacking from the rear is suicide against the B-17's tail guns. Instead, they favor the 12 o'clock high frontal assault, diving head-on at a closing speed of over 500 miles per hour, aiming for the cockpit and the engines, banking away only at the last terrifying second. For the crew of the All-American, a B-17F assigned to the 414th Bomb Squadron, the daily reality is a mix of boredom, mechanical labor, and moments of sheer terror. The aircraft itself is a factory-fresh machine, carrying the tail number 12446. It is a symbol of American industrial might, seemingly invincible on the tarmac. But up at 25,000 feet, the thin aluminum skin offers no protection against the 20mm cannon shells of the Luftwaffe. January has been a grueling month. The 97th Bomb Group has flown mission after mission, hammering the docks at Sfax and Sousse. Casualties are mounting. The psychological strain is visible in the 1,000-yard stares of the officers at the briefing hut. Every morning they wake up in the freezing desert pre-dawn, drink lukewarm coffee, and look at the operations board to see if they are flying into the flak corridors again. On the morning of February 1st, 1943, the orders come down. The target is the German-controlled port of Tunis. Intelligence reports heavy shipping activity in the harbor. The destruction of these supplies is critical to the Allied advance. The All-American is fueled, heavily loaded with demolition bombs, and prepped for takeoff. The crew, led by First Lieutenant Kendrick R. Bragg, climbs aboard, unaware that they are about to fly a mission that will be studied by engineers and historians for decades to come. The engines cough to life, kicking up clouds of Algerian dust, signaling the start of a routine operation that will soon defy physics. The ascent from Biskra is a slow, heavy grind, loaded with 4,000 pounds of high explosives and thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel. The All-American claws its way through the thin desert air, engines roaring at maximum continuous power. By the time the squadron clears the Atlas Mountains, the outside air temperature has plummeted. The crew dons heavy, shearling-lined leather jackets and plugs into the aircraft's heating system. At 20,000 feet, the world inside the B-17 changes. It becomes a realm of synthetic survival. Without their oxygen masks, the men would fall unconscious in minutes. Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg holds the formation tight. In 1943, the only safety for a heavy bomber lies in the collective firepower of the group. The 97th Bomb Group assembles into a combat box, a staggered three-dimensional formation designed to stack the fields of fire of dozens of .50 caliber machine guns. From a distance, it looks like a graceful flock of metal birds. Up close, it is a terrifying defensive phalanx. As they approach the Tunisian coast, the serenity of the flight evaporates. The sky around Tunis is defended by heavy 88mm anti-aircraft guns. Black puffs of flak begin to blossom around the formation, silent, deadly clouds of shrapnel that appear instantaneously. The bomber stream does not waver. To deviate from the flight path during the bomb run is to miss the target, and missing the target means returning tomorrow to face the same guns again. Navigator Harry C. Nussel and Bombardier Ralph Burbridge are the eyes of the ship. Burbridge hunches over the Norden bomb site in the plexiglass nose, fighting the optical distortions and the violent jolts of turbulence. The target, the sprawling docks of the Tunis harbor, slides into the crosshairs. Bombs away. The aircraft lurches upward, relieved of 2 tons of ordnance. Below, explosions ripple across the German supply depots, sending plumes of smoke thousands of feet into the air. The mission, technically, is a success, but for a bomber crew, the drop is only the midpoint. Now comes the most dangerous phase, the turn for home. As the formation banks away from the target, the flak dies down, replaced by a more predatory threat. Radar stations on the ground have vectored the Luftwaffe interceptors. High above the bombers, specks of light glint in the sun. They are Messerschmitt Bf-109s from Jagdgeschwader 53, the ace of Spade's wing. These are not rookie pilots. They are veterans who have learned the hard way how to dismantle a B-17. The German fighters do not attack immediately. They stalk the formation, looking for stragglers, assessing the defensive fire. They climb high, positioning themselves up-sun so that the American gunners will be blinded by the glare when looking for them. Inside the All-American, the interphone crackles with tense call-outs. Bandits, 3 o'clock high. Fighters, 12 o'clock, coming around. The waist gunners, Michael Zuck and Elton Conda, charge their weapons. The cold air rushing through the open waist windows freezes the condensation of their breath instantly. They scan the vast blue emptiness, waiting for the swarm. The All-American is flying in a dangerous position, exposed on the edge of the formation. As the German fighters initiate their dives, dropping like stones from the upper altitudes, they single out the bomber. The speed of the engagement shifts from the slow, lumbering pace of the bombardment to a frantic, split-second struggle for survival. The Bf-109s are closing at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. This is the moment where strategy ends and engineering takes over. The survival of the 10 men on board now depends entirely on the structural integrity of the Boeing airframe and the lethal geometry of the interception. As the first tracer rounds streak past the cockpit, the stage is set for a collision that will test the limits of what a machine can endure. To understand why the events of the next 90 minutes are mechanically impossible, one must first look beneath the skin of the Boeing B-17. It is not merely a collection of parts, it is a masterclass in over-engineering. Designed in the 1930s, the Flying Fortress was built with a philosophy of redundancy that borders on paranoia. The fuselage is a semi-monocoque design. Unlike early aircraft that relied on an internal skeleton to carry the load, the B-17's strength comes from its skin. Sheets of alclad aluminum alloy are riveted onto a framework of circular bulkheads and longitudinal stringers. This creates a rigid, lightweight shell that distributes stress across the entire surface. If one section is blown away, the load can theoretically transfer to the remaining structure, up to a point. The tail section, or empennage, is the aircraft's anchor in the sky. It houses the massive vertical stabilizer, the fin that keeps the plane flying straight, and the horizontal stabilizers that control pitch. Crucially, the control cables that connect the pilot's yoke to the rudder and elevators run like a central nervous system through the rear fuselage. If these steel cables are severed, the aircraft becomes an uncontrollable brick. If the tail structure itself fails, the center of gravity shifts instantly, and the plane will pitch violently nose down, snapping the wings off in seconds. No B-17 has ever survived the loss of its tail. But there is a second angle to this equation. The man in the machine approaching from the north. The German pilot is flying a Messerschmitt Bf-109G6. To the Allies, it is simply a Me-109. To the Luftwaffe pilots, it is Boiler, the bump, or simply Gustav. It is a light, agile fighter built around a massive Daimler-Benz inverted V12 engine. By 1943, the 109 is an aging design, but in the hands of an expert, it is lethal. The pilot belongs to Jagdgeschwader 53, the famous Picasse wing. He knows that shooting at a B-17 from behind is a waste of ammunition. The bomber's armor plate and self-sealing fuel tanks can absorb hundreds of machine gun rounds. To bring down a fat car, he must hit the crew or the engines. The tactic is simple but terrifying: the head-on pass. The German pilot must fly a collision course directly at the bomber's nose. The closing speed is over 600 miles per hour, nearly the speed of sound. He has perhaps 2 seconds to aim, fire his nose-mounted cannon, and then violently push the stick forward to dive under the bomber, or yank it back to climb over. It is a game of chicken, played with high explosives. But on this day, the geometry of the intercept is slightly off. As the fighters swarm, the German pilot initiates his attack roll. He commits to the dive. He is inverted, upside down, aiming to rake the B-17's fuselage with cannon fire before pulling away. But something goes wrong. Perhaps he is hit by defensive fire from the All-American's nose gunner. Perhaps the G-forces lock his controls. Or perhaps in the blinding glare of the Tunisian sun, he simply misjudges the distance. He does not pull out. In the waist of the All-American, the gunners stop firing. There is no time to track the target. There is only the flash of a yellow nose cone expanding to fill the entire field of view. The German fighter is not just attacking the bomber, he is becoming a projectile. For Staff Sergeant Michael Zuck and Sergeant Elton Conda in the waist gun positions, the war is not a strategic abstraction. It is a visceral, freezing tunnel of wind. They stand amid a carpet of spent shell casings, their boots slipping on the brass. The B-17 is unpressurized, and at altitude the air is thin enough to induce hypoxia in seconds if a mask line freezes. But right now their focus is entirely visual. They are watching the German fighter with a kind of detached horror. A head-on attack usually ends with the enemy plane flashing past in a blur. This one is different. The Bf-109 is upside down, its belly pale against the deep blue sky, and it is getting larger. It is not banking. It is not diving. It is sliding through the air in a controlled skid, dead aimed at the B-17's flight path. There is no time to communicate. The interphone system is too slow for the speed of thought. Zook braces himself against the fuselage frame. In the tail, Sergeant Sam Sarpoulos, the tail gunner, has the most terrifying seat in the theater. He is isolated in the extreme rear of the aircraft, watching the tragedy unfold through armored glass, knowing that whatever happens, he will be the first to feel it. Up in the cockpit, Lieutenant Bragg and his co-pilot, G. Boyd Jr., are effectively blind to the drama unfolding behind them. Their world is the instrument panel and the wingtip of the lead bomber. To fly a tight formation requires intense muscular concentration. Bragg is wrestling the heavy yoke to counteract the prop wash of the planes ahead. He cannot look back. He cannot see the enemy fighter spiraling out of control. This disconnect is the cruel irony of bomber command. The pilots are responsible for the lives of the crew, yet they are often the last to know when the ship is dying. They feel the hits as shudders or hear them as metallic crunches, but they rely on the gunners to be their eyes. Bragg holds the throttle steady. He is waiting for the call, clear, meaning the fighters have passed. Instead, the universe behind his armored seat is about to be torn apart. The German pilot, either dead at the controls or locked in a fatal aerodynamic stall, crashes through the mental barrier of collision course. The mathematics of the impact are absolute. A 3-ton metal object moving at 300 miles per hour is about to intersect with a 20-ton object moving at 200 miles per hour. The kinetic energy is sufficient to shear through steel girders. There is no maneuver Bragg can perform, no evasive action that can alter the outcome. The time for piloting is over. The time for structural survival has begun. The impact is not a crash. It is a disintegration. At precisely 12:12 p.m., the inverted Messerschmitt strikes the All-American. The sound is a sickening metallic shriek that overpowers the roar of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines. The German fighter, traveling at over 400 miles per hour relative to the bomber, does not simply hit the B-17. It cleaves through it. The left wing of the Bf-109 slices into the top of the B-17's rear fuselage just behind the waist gunner's position. Simultaneously, the fighter's fuselage slams into the vertical stabilizer of the bomber. For a split second, the two machines are fused in a chaotic embrace of twisting metal. Then the laws of physics tear them apart. The Messerschmitt explodes. The violence of the collision shreds the German fighter into confetti. The engine block, the cockpit, and the pilot are ripped away into the slipstream, tumbling down toward the Tunisian desert 3 miles below. But the fighter leaves a calling card. Debris from the 109 remains embedded deep within the bomber's airframe, and large sections of the German aircraft's wings are now wedged inside the B-17's fuselage. Inside the All-American, the world tilts on its axis. The entire aircraft lurches violently upward and to the right. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Bragg is thrown against his harness. The yoke kicks back in his hands with the force of a jackhammer. He fights to regain control, his boots slamming onto the rudder pedals, expecting no response. Miraculously, the plane responds, sluggishly, heavily, but it levels out. Report. Bragg shouts over the interphone. What the hell was that? Silence. The interphone lines to the rear have been severed. In the waist, Sergeant Zuck picks himself up from the floor. He looks aft and his brain refuses to process what he sees. The rear of the plane is gone. Or rather, it is almost gone. A gaping hole, nearly 6 feet wide, runs diagonally across the top of the fuselage. The entire tail section, the horizontal stabilizers, the elevators, and the tail gunner's compartment is swaying back and forth, completely out of sync with the rest of the plane. The structure has been cut almost all the way through. The heavy, vertical fin is gone. The rudder is shattered. The only thing connecting the tail to the main fuselage is a narrow strip of aluminum skin on the bottom, and a single twisted longeron, a structural beam no thicker than a man's wrist. And in the very back, trapped in the swinging tail section, like a pendulum, is tail gunner Sam Sarpolis. The wind screams through the jagged opening, threatening to tear the tail loose with every knot of airspeed. Zook watches in terror as the gap widens and closes with the vibration of the engines. The tail section is acting like a separate aircraft, flying in formation with the front half, but held by a thread. If it snaps, the center of gravity will shift instantly. The All-American will pitch nose down into an irrecoverable dive, and the centrifugal force will trap everyone inside until they hit the ground. Bragg, unaware of the severity, feels the plane vibrating like a tuning fork. He pushes the throttles forward to stay with the formation. He doesn't know that every mile per hour of speed increases the drag on the severed tail, pushing the aluminum strip closer to its breaking point. The situation inside the All-American has moved beyond emergency procedures into the realm of pure survival instinct. Staff Sergeant Zuck and the other waist gunners stare across the abyss at the tail gunner, Sam Sarpolis. He is alive. He is huddled in the swaying tail section, unhurt but completely trapped. The walkway between the waist and the tail is gone, replaced by a howling vortex of wind and blue sky. If he tries to crawl forward, his weight alone might snap the final strip of metal holding the ship together. Zook grabs a length of parachute cord. He knows he has to get Sarpolis out. With the precision of a man defusing a bomb, he throws the cord across the gap. Sarpolis catches it. Slowly, agonizingly, the tail gunner crawls toward the jagged edge of the fuselage. The tail groans and twists, moving independently of the wings. One slip, or one violent pocket of turbulence, and both men are dead. Sarpolis lunges across the breach. Zook grabs him, and together they tumble onto the floor of the waist section, safe on the solid side of the wreck. Up front, Lieutenant Bragg still doesn't know the extent of the damage. He only knows the aircraft feels loose, like a car with 4 flat tires. The rest of the formation has slowed down to stay with him, a rare act of chivalry in a ruthless air war. But as the other bomber crews slide alongside to inspect the damage, their radios come alive with disbelief. My God, a pilot from a neighboring B-17 radios. You have no tail. The P-51 Mustang escorts, usually darting around the formation, slow their sleek fighters down to stall speed to pull up alongside the All-American. The fighter pilots stare, shaken. One of them snaps a photograph, an image that will soon become legendary. It shows the B-17 flying level, with a slice taken out of it so large that the fields of Tunisia are clearly visible through the fuselage. Bragg makes a command decision. If they bail out now, the sudden change in weight distribution, or the shock of the hatches opening, could tear the tail off. If the tail goes, the plane spins, and the G-forces will pin the crew to the walls, preventing escape. The safest place is inside the dying machine. They are 90 minutes from home. The flight back to Biskra is a masterclass in delicate handling. Bragg flies with his fingertips. He avoids sudden movements. He commands the crew to jettison everything that isn't bolted down. Guns, ammo, armor plates, to lighten the load. Every pound dropped reduces the strain on the single spar holding the tail. The German fighters, seeing the crippled bomber, surprisingly do not finish it off. Perhaps they are out of ammunition. Perhaps they assume the plane is already dead. Or perhaps, witnessing the catastrophic damage, they simply cannot believe it is still flying. As the airfield at Biskra comes into view, Bragg faces his final test. The landing. He cannot make a standard approach. If he drops the flaps or landing gear too early, the drag will snap the tail. If he lands too hard, the impact will snap the tail. He has to grease a 20-ton bomber onto a dirt strip at 100 miles per hour, perfectly level. He orders the crew to the center of the plane to balance the weight. He lines up the runway. He eases the throttles back. The ground rushes up. The wheels kiss the earth. The All-American rolls out, slowing down, the tail bobbing precariously with every bump in the dirt. As the plane loses speed, the airflow over the stabilizers decreases, and the tail loses its lift. It sags. Finally, the bomber comes to a halt. The engines are cut. The silence of the desert rushes back in. And then, with a groan of tortured metal, the rear wheel collapses. The tail section, having held on for 90 minutes of flight, finally gives up the ghost and sags onto the ground. The silence that follows the shutdown of the engines is heavier than the noise of the flight. For a moment, no one moves. Then, the hatches pop open. Lieutenant Bragg, his flight suit soaked in sweat, despite the freezing altitude, climbs out of the cockpit. The rest of the crew tumbles out of the waist door and the nose hatch, their feet hitting the solid Algerian earth with a reverence usually reserved for holy ground. An ambulance races across the tarmac, sirens wailing, expecting a massacre. They find 10 men standing by the wreck, lighting cigarettes with shaking hands, physically unhurt but psychologically altered. The ground crew arrives seconds later. These are men who fix bullet holes and flak damage every day. They are accustomed to the violence of war, but as they round the fuselage to inspect the tail, they stop dead in their tracks. The profanity and shouting usually present on a flight line evaporate. They simply stare. The structure of the All-American defies engineering logic. The vertical fin is gone. The rudder is gone. The left horizontal stabilizer is completely sheared off. The fuselage is sliced open from the top down to the bottom, leaving a gap of nearly 16 feet where the metal skin is missing. The only structural member that had kept the tail attached to the rest of the plane and kept 10 men alive was a single section of the lower fuselage and the floor beams. Upon closer inspection, the mechanics find the physical proof of the collision. Wedged deep inside the torn aluminum of the elevator bank is a piece of gray-green metal that does not belong to a Boeing aircraft. It is a section of the Messerschmitt's wing, painted with the black cross of the Luftwaffe. The German fighter hadn't just hit them. It had deposited its own wreckage into the bomber before disintegrating. The lead mechanic, shaking his head, reportedly tells Bragg, "Lieutenant, this plane shouldn't be on the ground. It should be in a scrap heap in Tunisia." The story of the All-American did not stay in the desert. It traveled back to the United States on the strength of a single photograph. Taken by a crewman in a neighboring bomber during the flight home, the grainy black and white image captures the B-17 in profile against the clouds. The damage is so severe that it looks like a photo manipulation, a trick of the light. The tail appears to be floating, detached from the fuselage. When the image reached the Boeing headquarters in Seattle, it circulated through the engineering departments like a religious icon. For the designers, it was vindication. The B-17 had been criticized in its early development for being too heavy, too complex, and too expensive. But the All-American proved that the Fortress moniker was not just propaganda. The redundancy of the geodetic design, the thousands of rivets and the overlapping stringers, had done exactly what it was supposed to do: sacrifice the body to save the heart. The Army Air Forces seized upon the incident as a potent morale booster. The photograph was printed in newspapers, pinned to factory walls, and shown to new recruits. It sent a clear message to the airmen who had to climb into these machines day after day. The enemy can hurt this plane, but they cannot easily kill it. Incredibly, the All-American itself was not retired, in a testament to the interchangeability of American mass production. The maintenance crews at Biskra cannibalized parts from other wrecked B-17s. They replaced the entire tail section, riveted new skins over the scar, and restrung the control cables. The aircraft returned to combat status. It flew dozens more missions over North Africa and Italy, carrying different crews through the same flak corridors that had nearly destroyed it. It survived the war, serving until the end of hostilities, a silent, patched-up witness to the durability of the machine age. But beyond the engineering triumph, the incident shifted the psychological landscape of the air war. It reinforced the cult of the B-17, the belief among crews that if they did their job, the plane would bring them home. It was a belief that would be tested to the breaking point over the skies of Germany in the years to come. But on that February day in Tunisia, it held true. War is often decided by the grand sweep of strategy, supply lines, industrial output, and the movement of armies. But occasionally, the entire conflict contracts into a singular, impossible moment, where the outcome rests on a few rivets and the nerve of a single crew. The survival of the All-American is more than a story of luck. It is the ultimate validation of a design philosophy that prioritized the survival of the human being over the efficiency of the machine. In the cold calculus of 1943, a bomber was an expendable asset, costing roughly $200,000. But the 10 men inside were priceless. The engineers at Boeing who designed the honeycomb structure of the wing and the overlapping strength of the fuselage had never seen the skies over Tunisia. Yet, their work held together against a force that should have shattered it. When we look at the photograph of that severed tail today, we see the brutality of air warfare frozen in time. We see the terrifying proximity of death, the razor-thin margin between returning to base and vanishing into the desert. But we also see a stubborn, mechanical defiance. The All-American did not just land, it refused to fall. It reminds us that in the face of overwhelming destruction, there is a profound resilience in both the machines we build and the men who fly them, a refusal to break, even when the world is literally tearing apart around you. In the end, the plane did exactly what it was built to do. It brought them home.